The school movie. Whether it brings back good memories, bad memories, memories we wish we could have had, a nostalgic feeling, a sense of dread, or any combination thereof, there's no denying that there's few other types of movies out there that 99% of us can relate to or have experienced firsthand ourselves. However, when it comes to these kinds of movies, there is, like anything else, a right and a wrong way to do it, especially when it comes to how school itself is presented. And today, I'd like to go over a few different movies that I feel did an effective and maybe not so effective job at this. But before we get started, I would just like to give my usual warning that there will be spoilers ahead for all the movies in question, so you might just want to be on the lookout in case there's anything you don't want ruined. This is the only warning I'll be giving out. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get right into it. Now, the first movie I want to cover here is perhaps the best school movie, as well as one of the best comedies of all time in general, Animal House. Between the wacky antics, funny lines, and John Belushi, it's really no wonder why everybody seems to love this movie. Sure, it's a little crude for some people's liking, but I think most can agree that's a pretty minor flaw. But what I want to discuss here mainly comes down to how the school, students, and people running it are presented. Okay, for a quick summary, just from the title alone, you know this isn't exactly going to be about uptight students studying for their doctorates. And almost immediately, that's proven to be the case. We get to see the fraternity house in question, which is an absolute mess full of delinquents who refuse to take anything seriously, while the staff and more well-behaved students are presented as extremely over-the-top villains who are out to get this fraternity by pretty unethical means. After that, we're shown quite a few scenes reinforcing this, where the delinquents are shown to be lovable, mostly good natured pranksters and troublemakers, while the more disciplined students are not nice people that abuse their position with the dean to get their sadistic kicks. And what is also likely to endear us to the Animal House is that they only target the students in question, never going after anybody the audience doesn't already know to be a jerk. But after about an hour of fun and antics, it all comes crashing down on the fraternity, and the dean has them expelled and fully intends on getting them drafted. So, after some moping and with nothing left to lose, the fraternity decides to get revenge on them by sabotaging a big parade the dean and good students are hosting, succeeding in thoroughly humiliating all of them. And then we see that all the delinquents went on to prosper, while the well behaved ones all met unfortunate or humiliating fates. Now, before we go any further, let's compare that to another school movie, Rock and Roll High School. Now, by the title alone, one might guess it's a musical about high school or about a high school band. But we quickly find that isn't the case. Instead, we find the movie is about a whole school full of delinquents who rebel against the establishment any way they can, mostly through music. And the new dean is determined to get the students back under control. And when that inevitably fails, the kids storm the school, trash it, and ultimately blow it up and watch it burn to the ground. And there's also quite a bit of absurd humor involving mice. Alright, so if you're wondering what my point here is, it's that one of these movies does a much better job of doing what it sets out to do, and I don't think I even have to tell you which one that is. Because ultimately, Animal House strikes the perfect, and I mean perfect, balance between escapism and reality. We root for the delinquents because even though they're troublemakers, they're obviously good people who, like I said before, never target anybody unless they deserve it. And considering how their competing fraternity house and staff behave, they easily come across as the most likable characters in the movie. But what's also important is that they end up suffering the consequences of their behavior. Their slacker and partying nature would never be tolerated on a real campus, and that's the end result for them as well. In fact, the only reason you're not rooting for the dean is because he's taking way too much enjoyment in making them suffer, tries to condemn them to a rather disproportionate fate, and the fact that the audience already knows him to be a self-righteous jerk. So when the delinquents take their revenge, it's specifically to make the people who wronged them suffer as payback and nobody else. Sure, quite a few innocent people get caught in the crossfire, but what's important to note is that nobody gets hurt except the people they're targeting, and that we know deserve it. To put it simply, the dean and his cronies punish them more to make them suffer as opposed to doing their duty of disciplining them. So they do the exact same thing back by humiliating and making them suffer. In other words, their revenge is warranted because it was the bad guys who made things personal, and it's only them the delinquents are targeting. And of course, being told what happens to them afterwards only cements the happy ending, as it shows the troublemakers went on to live good lives in spite of their good-natured bad behavior, while the good students all went on to get exactly what's coming to them. Now, in contrast, Rock and Roll High School does none of this setup. It just thrusts you right into it, showing that the students are simply driving the staff crazy and that nothing they do will get them to stop. Basically, this movie wants you to be on the student side and against the staff simply because school sucks. I mean, when you really stop and think about it, the dean has been given the almost impossible task of trying to ring in a student body that will not behave. So can one really blame her for going to the lengths she does? Even when she's doing things like confiscating concert tickets or burning records, one can't help but think that none of this would have happened, and she wouldn't have resorted to such lengths if the kids had just behaved themselves in the first place. Because again, the movie starts with the students already out of control. So if the staff did anything to deserve it, the audience doesn't get to see it. And the other problem here is that the kids are presented as in the right from the start. Never once is their behavior, ethics, or lack of discipline ever condemned. And what makes this more glaring is that the main character is a huge instigator of it. Like I said before, the movie just automatically wants you to be on the student side and against the dean, even though in actuality the dean actually seems pretty justified in her behavior and the kids really do seem to be the ones causing the problem. And unlike Animal House, where their behavior ultimately leads to their expulsion and their actions do have consequences, here the students are simply treated as in the right and the audience is expected to just accept that. Really? The only reason to legitimately not like the dean is because her two cronies are a bit, unethical themselves. But even then, she shouldn't be blamed for what they do when she's not watching. To put it simply, the parade being destroyed at the end of Animal House is a huge triumph because it's the students getting revenge on the jerks who took way too much pleasure in disciplining them and are basically trying to ruin their lives. And because of their behavior throughout the rest of the movie, we know they're more than deserving of it. The school being destroyed at the end of Rock and Roll High School is a triumph because school is horrible? To put it simply, this movie operates on the notion that everybody watching it simply hates or hated school and will automatically go along with everything that's presented regardless of who's actually in the right or wrong. And listen, if you liked or even loved the movie, that's fine. And I also get that it is meant to be a comedy and that neither are meant to be taken seriously, but at the same time, presentation is always extremely important, even in the silliest or unserious of movies. Because Animal House gives the audience a bunch of reasons not to like the bad guys, as well as make the good guys' revenge on them feel warranted. And that's the key here. It isn't school itself that's ever presented as being wrong. It's the people who are running it that are presented that way. While in Rock and Roll High School, school itself is just presented in and of itself as wrong from the get-go. And you have to admit, that's a pretty weak justification for why the student's behavior is warranted and why the dean is the bad guy. In other words, it's okay to present something as, say, a cult as inherently wrong, because simply put, it is. But it's not okay to just present school itself as in the wrong and have anything the students do be justified on that notion alone. Because no matter how much you didn't enjoy it as a kid or how flawed you may think the system is, it's still vital for all of us to learn. Because if we didn't, where would we be in terms of a society? But to get back on track, that's why I'd say a movie in the middle of these two would be Dead Poets Society. Now, if you ask me, this one is a little harder to call, because even though I have my own personal feelings on it, I'll try to keep them out of the discussion. Now, this movie does ultimately portray school as choking young people's creativity and making them more concerned with behaving themselves than growing as people. And that's why Mr. Keating is portrayed as a great figure, because he's trying to teach students how to think rather than what to think, as well as showing them that authority is, and never should be, an absolute. However, that isn't to say that discipline the children are learning from their school is necessarily bad or something they shouldn't be taught. Because discipline and respect for your superiors are two invaluable assets to have at most high paying jobs. So, in that regard, you could argue that these kids are simply being taught a harsh truth about the real world. That if you don't have an extremely high level of good behavior or self control, then you won't get very far in life. But to be fair, Mr. Keating never does tell the children to misbehave or disrespect authority, and even tells them off when they do as such. So it could then be taken as the movie trying to say that you shouldn't be deathly afraid of those above you to the point that you can't think for yourself, which is what the school is teaching them, but that responsibility and respect are still very important. But how much this assessment is actually correct is really up to the individual viewer to decide. And on top of that, the heads of the school are never shown to do anything unreasonable or unethical until they scapegoat Keating for Neil's death. But even then, it isn't made clear if they genuinely believed Keating was at fault or not, and the boys' attempts to defend him were just them trying to protect him. So basically, in keeping with the movie's theme, it really leaves it up to the audience to decide if their depiction of school is one that strangles creativity and makes people terrified of authority is warranted. Though if you ask me, where the movie fares better is in showing that Keating's general open-minded and kind, but responsible nature generally leads to some kind of benefit, while Neil's father and his stubborn attempts to mold his son into what he wants while refusing to make any effort to understand him as an individual only leads to him losing everything. In other words, I feel it better shows that kindness and not exerting authority over others yields all around better results for everyone involved. Basically, I feel Keating's teachings work better as life lessons than as a commentary on how or what school teaches children. And even more simply put, I'd personally rather have Mr. Keating as a friend than as a teacher. Okay, so to wrap it all up, school movies should be more careful in the way they present school as its own entity. Because as I mentioned before, one of the reasons Animal House works so well is because it doesn't treat school as inherently wrong, and even treats the good character's lack of respect towards it as a bad thing. And, of course, another reason is John Belushi, but that's not relevant here. The point is, it's usually a lot smarter to portray something about school as wrong, rather than the institution itself. Because again, isn't it stretching it a bit to just expect the audience to hate school for no reason? And also, when school itself is portrayed as wrong, it ends up opening a whole discussion on whether or not that's really true. Now, whether or not you think that's a good thing or not is up to you. But when dealing with comedies that simply want the audience to have fun, I think it's better when they go more with Animal House's approach of giving the audience a reason to hate the staff or certain students and not make the school itself out to be bad. And to their credit, most school movies I've seen have taken that approach. So I guess that it's something that isn't a huge issue. But if there's anything to take away from this video, I guess it's that you can learn something valuable even from a movie as fun and ridiculous as Animal House. Alright, I believe that's everything I wanted to say. So now I'd like to hear what you think. Do you believe that school movies shouldn't portray school itself as wrong unless they're trying to make a commentary on it? Or do you believe that everybody hates school and thus is no big deal? Please feel free to discuss your thoughts in the comments. But let's try and keep the philosophical debates out of this. I only wanted to talk about how the movies presented school, and not if they were right about what they were saying or not. As I said before, you don't have to agree with anything I said in this video. It's all up to you. You can feel any way about these movies that you want to. And thank you all for watching. It is all very much appreciated. And I hope to see you all next time.